All right. Hello and welcome everybody to that channel. Today I have got a very special guest to talk about something that's slightly different to the kind of topics that we have been talking on this channel. Today we'll focus on technology, AI, artificial intelligence, and inevitably briefly about war as well, insofar as war could be related to technology, I believe. So my guest today is my friend Asmelash. It's going to be a very friendly chat for me, a very easy chat for me. So Asmelash, welcome to our channel, and please say a few words about our channel and also about yourself.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Take, for having me. I'm a huge fan of Tigray. You guys are doing an amazing job. I've been following the work that's documenting these atrocities that are happening in Tigray, and this is a commendable job. Thank you for doing that awesome job.
Fantastic. So Asmelash is founder and chief technology officer of Lesan. We'll talk more about Lesan later. He's also a researcher and also a technology entrepreneur, I would say. We'll expand on it later, Asmelash, but tell us a bit about yourself in some detail.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, my name is Asmelash, or Asmi for short. Currently, I'm building Lesan. At Lesan, our mission is to democratize access to the web for millions of people, and we do that by building machine translation systems. Prior to Lesan, I did a PhD in applied machine learning. My research ranged from leveraging the social web for applications in crisis communication to scholarly communication, and also in natural language processing in low resource settings. Before the PhD, my master's, I did an Erasmus Mundus program in data mining and knowledge management, and that's how I came to Europe. It was a fascinating experience, and not only just for education, but also the cultural experience in Europe that ultimately led me to basically stay here. And before that, I come from Tigray, so I did an undergrad in information technology at Maghale Institute of Technology, which was a follow-up to Alameda Spatial High School, where Tech and I went to do our high school and also university studies. So that's my educational background. And yeah, currently I'm based in Berlin, Germany.
Well, maybe interesting. Maybe expand a bit about your master's program. I think it was exchange program, Erasmus exchange. You first went into, was it to France, and then to Romania, I believe.
Exactly.
But tell us more about what it was like, the experience of going from it. I think that must have been the first time you went outside Ethiopia into Europe, and then it must have been kind of culture shock, as they say.
Exactly.
So, tell us more.
Those are the keywords, culture shock. I like that. Yes, the program, data mining and knowledge management, I'm not sure if it still exists, but it was an interesting program where, as you rightly said, the study was located in 3 countries. I did first year in Lyon in France, and then for 6 months in Bucharest in Romania, and then the last 6 months in Barcelona in Spain. So it was indeed a culture shock coming from Ethiopia to Tigray for the first time in Europe, and it wasn't just the education, but the cultural experience and everything with it.
So that was the subject matter of your master's degree was kind of broadly speaking data mining, although data mining is maybe too broad a term, but that led you to the PhD. What was the connection like? How did it go from your master's and then to the PhD?
Sure. So I did my master's thesis at the Yahoo Labs in Barcelona. And at the time, it was kind of interesting for me to see how the researchers and engineers worked at Yahoo. I saw the scientists kind of like tinkering and prototyping with different types of algorithms for the social search and other projects they had. And it occurred to me that it was just much more interesting to do that than just to build a system. And obviously, looking at those people, I felt like there was a way to go and do it, and I knew that a PhD would be the right way to go for that.
All right. So did it kind you make the connections with the people with whom you worked PhD during your time at Yahoo Labs, or was it something different? How did it happen? I think because some people kind of struggle to make the jump from master's program to the PhD. But typically, what happens is during kind of the final kind of term of your master's program, you kind of create connections, and that's kind of the path typically. But what was it like for you?
Absolutely. It was exactly that. There were people from the Leibniz University Hanover, specifically from the L3S Research Center, who were doing internship at the Yahoo Labs at the time. They were PhDs, but doing internship there. So I actually met some of them. They told me some nice things about their lab. But also my advisor, Ingmar Weber, shout out to him. I think he had plans to move to Leibniz University to set up his own team and so on. So indeed, I had this kind of internal connections already with this lab. So that gave me kind of like a head start. But also as any student, I applied to many different places, and luckily at the time I had admissions in other places as well. But I chose it because it was related to the stuff that I was working on and areas that fascinated me, specifically on web search and web mining and things of that sort.
Mm. So we'll kind of go to talk about Lesan, which I think will be the kind of the bulk of today's discussion. But I think the things that you would have done during your PhD time would have been kind of the foundation to what you're doing now. So what would, if you could kind of, I know this is very tricky to summarize something that you had done for 3 years in 3 minutes, but if you could kind of give us an idea, a taste of what the PhD was like, what the thesis was mainly about.
So sure, I started without a topic. So basically you start with stuff that you've been working on. And it was, mostly trying out different ideas and really discovering your own interests and in a way, learning from previous research and identifying gaps and trying to come up with ways to fill that gap. So at the early days, it was, trial and error with the techniques and things I was familiar with. And then at the later stages, I started kind of like discovering my interest. And in fact, it was at a time when, deep learning was like this huge thing that was kind of like engulfing all of machine learning. And I would spend extra hours, besides doing my research to learn these techniques and so on, and see them work for myself on things that I cared about. And these were mainly my language, for example, Tigrinya. I knew growing up in Tigray, there were kind of, lacking tools and resources for these languages. And it was only a matter of time when, I had the skills to kind of like apply them to that. So, and that's what I ended up doing.
Yeah. So was it the fact that you were aware of kind of the lack of tools for processing local languages in Ethiopia that kind of gave you the additional motivation to pursue the thing that you ended up doing? Was it kind of the main reason?
It indeed was. I don't know if you remember, because we attended the same program in our undergrad. My undergrad project, the final project,
was it localization, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I worked on localization. So this is the the idea of translating and adapting software for local use. So we localized Firefox and some tools in OpenOffice to Amharic and to Tigrinya, and we packaged them up in the Ubuntu operating system by taking out some games and inputting Ethiopian calendar to Gregorian calendar converter and so on. So yeah, it was always fascinating for me to see the use of a language in the computer system. I might add, if you remember Yuji, there was this volunteer at MIT, the Japanese volunteer. I believe it was the first time ever I saw a computer that was everything in Japanese. So the tools and technique, it could be OpenOffice, it could be, the tools we know. I always thought they were, in English. And it was the first time ever I just saw that, the whole operating system, including system and application programs, were everything in Japanese. That inspired me to do my undergrad project. But I believe that also had a huge influence on me building, what I'm building now as well.
Yeah, but interesting that I wouldn't have guessed that the fact that he had Japanese operating system and everything was kind of the eye opener for you to delve into those kind of issues as well. So one thing led to another, although there is a kind of a constant theme in what you have been doing for the past, I would say, decade almost now. It was related to processing languages and localization and making language kind of accessible to as many people as possible. And so that kind of led you to what you're doing now at Lesan. So I think it's now the right time maybe to ask you to kind of give us an idea of what Lesan is, what you are trying to achieve, kind of describe Lesan briefly.
Sure. So as I previously described, the mission is quite simple. Our mission is to make the web accessible to millions of people by making web content available in their language. Primarily, currently, we're doing this by building machine translation systems. So at the moment, we've built state-of-the-art machine translation systems to and from Amharic, Tigrinya English, and we have Oromo in the pipeline. And what does that mean? So for many people, accessing the internet or the web as we know it is not enough for them to actively use it. They have to have relevant content. And for Tigrinya, I can give you a very simple example, the case of Wikipedia. So Wikipedia has over 5 million articles in English. There are only less than like 300 articles in Tigrinya. That's less than 0.1% of the entire Wikipedia. Search engines such as like Google or Bing, when you ask them for information, they rely on these kind of resources to give you answers for your needs. So for us, even if you have the internet access in Tigray, there won't be enough local content for people to be able to consume the web's content in their language. That's the gap we're trying to fill with Lesan. Yeah, that's the overall idea of this startup. And as I say, the progress so far is quite encouraging. Despite the fact that the millions of people for whom we built the system are unfortunately cut off from the web. So we have no way, to tell if we have hit our target. But that was the goal, and we still continue to press on that.
We'll come back to kind of the irony of the fact that the people for whom you're trying to develop tools have been cut off, and how even on a personal level that must have been painful for you to see that millions of people could be overnight kind of cut off from huge benefits on the internet. But I just want to kind of to ask you about Lesan more. So off the top of my head, I'm thinking kind of it must be related with Google Translate, right? In some way. Although yeah. I would also presume that it's different. That would be the very reason why you are working on that. So in what way is it related, and in what way is it kind of different to maybe Google Translate and other generally translation services that must exist?
Yeah, great question. It is indeed functionally the current system. We have a web application. It provides text boxes where you can give it an input text in one of the 3 languages, Tigrinya, Amharic, or English, and out comes the other of the 3. So in that sense, we're providing the same service like other translation services like Google Translate or Microsoft Translator. Our first differentiator is quality. As I said earlier, for these languages, Lesan provides the best quality machine translation systems. But moving forward, we want to have like an application of its own. I can imagine it would be something like a browser where people can just browse any content they want. If we use, the communities in Tigray as an example, in Tigrinya. So whatever information they are accessing, it would be available in their language. So this is how probably the similarity and differences, because as we move forward, we want to iterate over different use cases and different product forms for it to evolve into the kind of vision we have to make it a gateway to the web for these communities. At the early stage, though, currently we're just building different products like machine translation and really other add-ons on top of that.
So when you say that one of your kind of selling points is that you provide better quality to Google translation services and other translation services, am I right in assuming that accuracy would be one of the metrics by which you would kind of compare products of this type?
There are some metrics in machine translation research. One of the famous ones is Blue Score. These are just like fancy names to kind of say how many of the terms that I expect the system to spit out are actually in the result of its translation output. Interestingly, for Tigrinya and Amharic, and this is something we've shown, these metrics don't necessarily capture quality as you might expect them. This has to do mainly because these are morphologically rich languages, which means to refer to some verb, for example, depending on the gender you use, on the time, and so on, it would have different surface forms. And for this system, for these metrics, it's very, very hard for them to capture these subtleties. So unlike in English, for example, drink might have 3-4 forms like drink, drunk, drinking. In Tigrinya, seti, setina, setia, setium, and so on. Like if you have to conjugate all of that, they would appear differently for this metrics, even though it probably is just the same word. Overall, what we used, for example, to show that Lesan is indeed better than the systems was like really human evaluation. So we kind of like selected, we selected the best translators possible. We reached out to translators and we did a kind of blind test. We asked them to select the sources themselves. The experiment setup was as follows. We told translators and journalists to kind of bring resources they feel very comfortable with across any categories in news. And then we gave them the outputs of these 3 systems. For example, for Amharic, they don't know which output is coming from which system. All they have to do is, well, this one is better, or give like an absolute score of, this is completely broken, this is okay, this is good, this is excellent, and so on. So we used human evaluation to kind of arrive at the results I just mentioned earlier. And this work has been published at NeurIPS. This is the premier conference for machine learning research and applications.
Yeah, we'll put the results that you just mentioned, the paper, in the description box when we publish this video, so that people who are interested in those kind of things could go and read. But you have given me now a lot of ideas, and I don't know which one to pursue. But I think, kind of roughly speaking, there are 2 ways of seeing the Lesan kind of edifice. One way is to see as a black box, where you have kind of a textual input in one specific language, you give it, and out you get the translated text in the target language, right? Exactly. But there will be people who are technically clued in, who might be wondering what the hell is happening inside the box. So maybe if you could give us some ideas of what is happening inside the box.
Cool, great question. Sure, so we are using what's called machine learning. And in machine learning, we do not explicitly tell the computer to say this word in English is this in Tigrinya, and this expression should become that, and so on. Instead, we just feed it a set of examples. So there is the input to these systems is what is called parallel corpus. This is a fancy term to mean words, expressions, and sentences from the source and the target language perfectly matched and aligned. And the more and the better quality of this input, the better the system is. So we feed our system millions of those examples for it to kind of like start to make these connections. Oh, I have seen water means my, and so on. And then it's in different expressions of that use. And so and so forth. So we use machine learning as opposed to, say, and in machine learning, we use specific type of algorithms called deep learning, and these are definitely better than the previous iterations. As when you have more data, they tend to kind of produce more fluent and really better quality translations than, let's say, phrase-based, machine translation kind of approaches.
So you mentioned parallel corpus, and I'm just, maybe you would be familiar with some of the works that our mutual friend Deborah Christos has been working on at Mermuru with respect to Tigrinya. One of the, I might misquote him, but I think I will fairly kind of characterize the motivation, the rationale for starting the Mermuru thing. He said that Tigrinya doesn't have a consistent writing system. So for instance, if you take the word Sahafa, for instance, there are about, I think, 6 or 7 kind of possibilities for spelling it. Mm-hmm. So that it makes it difficult for machine processing because there is no consistent way of writing. So that's a problem in one sense, but because you're describing machine learning, that you're trying to kind of make it as intelligent as a human being, if it's not a problem for us humans to spell it in 7 different ways, it shouldn't be a problem for the machine also if it's spelled in 7 different ways. So in another sense, I don't think it's a problem. But again, this is very naive take on my part. So you're going to talk, is that something that you have come across as a kind of as a problem? The fact that, yeah.
I think you had an excellent take on that. Mermuru does just much more than dealing with different writing systems and service forms. But what you just mentioned is one of the things it provides. And shout out to Deborah Christos, who's doing an amazing job. Keep up the excellent work. One of the things he does with the writing systems you mentioned is basically, so if I give you a root verb for how to write Sahafa, and then I was talking about different forms of conjugating this depending on who's saying it to who, and say the number or the tense or the gender. And at Mermuru, they've come with an algorithm, with a way of taking this root verb or root form into this hundreds of surface forms of that. And this has implications for the kind of systems I was in training, the kind of systems I was talking about. Is it a problem for machine learning in general and machine translation in particular? Yes. If you have a consistent way of writing and it doesn't have all these kind of surface forms, it would be easier to learn. But I think there are also ways to kind of like give this and let the system really learn for itself. And one of the examples I use is if we take the word Sahafa, for example, and the system would see hundreds of variations of that form in different examples. And I think from there, it would generalize which is like the most frequent use, and then would probably use that way. Now, is this the right way to go? I think generally there are 2 schools of thought on how to go about like having consistent writing system and so on. One would be, well, let's study the language. What is a very linguistic approach of this comes from the root is form, so it has to be written in this and that. And then there is this computational corpus linguistics approach where you're saying, well, people are using it every day. They're using it on the web and books, writing books and so on. Let's just take what is being used and just generalize from that. I might tend into the second category because I'm not a purist, and I think the more people kind of find this usage over time, and I think that becomes then the norm, and computers will pick up that form as the way, the dominant or the right way to do it.
So kind of roughly speaking, that there's no need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. Like the second argument would be that, right?
Yeah, exactly. If we expose many people to different technology and so on, and for various reasons, which form of should they use? I mean, it should come from people. People will tend to use one form or the other. And if you empower people to kind of let them, use the computer to write Sahafa, you will see it, across hundreds of thousands of people, they use one form over the other. And I believe that that should be the norm, instead of, somebody top down saying like, this is the way it should be, and everybody has to use it that way. It's just a personal opinion, but
well, I think, I get the point, and I see where you're coming from, but kind of, again, this is not a well thought out comment that I'm giving you, so you correct me. One problem I could easily think of with the way things are today is, if you want to make a search, for instance, for a given text, for instance, for Sahafa, just assume that is some person's name. You don't really know how to enter the search text, because there's no consistent way of spelling. So I could kind of think some little problems in that sense. But in terms of the machine learning, I am absolutely in agreement with you that there shouldn't be any problem, because you're trying to educate the machine to behave as though it were a human being.
Right. I think you have a great point there. We have to have a good education system for our languages. And, we probably will converge into, some consistent way of writing. And that's great, because it would reduce, cost for the machines. And we're creating anyway problems, and reducing those problems would help a lot. But until we get there, and how we get there is where I was just kind of like assuming, you have like these two approaches. I guess the first approach of, having good education system, consistent way of writing, it will probably take time, but it is actually the way to go. But then you would need generations of people learning from, starting from elementary school, and those, when they grow up and use it in, work and so on, that becomes the norm. Do we need to wait decades for that to happen? That's why we can just use the second approach, which is the fallback, where, however people are writing it, we can, make them still useful and searchable.
All right, but in terms of machine learning, you don't believe that there's kind of significant problem whether people wrote this way or that way. It's all the same.
Well, it would be much easier for machine learning if there was a consistent way of writing. There's no doubt about that. The reality is, there's no way. Who enforces this? And if we get into the case, for example, some literature that comes from Eritrea tends to use a different form of than the literature that comes from Tigray. But this is even like gross generalization. There are people who use who mix it across the board, and the same is true for other characters. There is where like my comment, that second approach of being flexible for these kind of variations in the algorithms we build.
Approach,
Exactly.
But in terms of the parallel corpus, what is the source? Where do you get them from? Do you kind of face difficulty kind of obtaining enough amount of, because my understanding is that we should have kind of one text in Tigrinya and then corresponding text in, for instance, Oromifa, if you want to translate between Tigrinya and Oromifa, right?
Exactly.
So do you have enough kind of data set that would be kind of big enough to train a machine, or do you have to kind of artificially create your own text?
Again, this is a wonderful question, and it's at the core of the hypothesis of why Lesan exists. Lesan exists because we have this hypothesis that in these languages that are generally categorized as low resource languages, because there is no enough resource, enough parallel corpus, building these systems takes forever. Some of these giant companies have been building machine translation systems for over a decade now. And for example, in the leading system, you don't find Tigrinya. And the unique hypothesis and insight we have is basically that you can leverage online but also offline sources to kind of like build these data sets to kind of build working systems. And this was just a hypothesis that we successfully proved for Tigrinya. At the time when we started, people thought like, well, there's not enough data. How are you going to do this? And is this really doable? And as you rightly actually guessed, there are different techniques of creating synthetic data. Also, we relied on other technology called optical character recognition, OCR, to kind of onboard other magazines, especially for Amharic, that had a lot of corpus, a lot of books that were translated in English and Amharic. And we used other proxies, especially to create synthetic parallel corpus from Tigrinya and Amharic, because these are very, very related languages. So yeah, in general, in this kind of like area where we are, which is termed as like low resource machine translation, resources, specifically parallel corpus, but also monolingual corpus is indeed the problem. You don't have enough of them. And that's the input you use to build the systems. But if you're, if you come up with good designs to build synthetic data, it's actually doable.
Fascinating, yeah. So if someone who have kind of reasonably good understanding of machine learning was listening to this conversation, I'm sure that they would be wondering what kind of the technical problems involved in this project are. So could you talk a little about what it is that you're trying to what are the things that you're trying to resolve in terms of technical problems that must underlie the project, I believe?
Yeah, cool. So before I address that, maybe on the first one, if any of your listeners, anyone who wants to apply machine learning to different areas, because this is not just only for languages, it's applicable across different areas, say health, agriculture, across any topic really. And one of the questions you probably will hear is like, what if Google does that? What if, another big company does that? And from this small experiment, I can assure you, if you have if you have some insights, if you have resources, I want you to go ahead and try an experiment. You will be surprised how much of progress and real impact you could bring if you just get past that noise of, well, Google is going to do it, or Microsoft is going to attack this problem, and so on. Now, moving on to the second part of the question. If you really like the mission of Lesan, if you want to make the web accessible to millions of people in their language, these things won't happen just because we want them. We need a lot of talented people to join hands. We need people with the resources to contribute towards that, because only together we can make these things happen. So specifically for Lesan, if you're interested in low resource languages, specifically in the Horn of Africa, where we're currently working with different languages, please do reach out, and we're very happy to collaborate. We worked on recently. We just released a dataset on benchmark dataset to evaluate machine translation systems for 5 languages in the Horn of Africa. It's been interesting to receive messages of how students in Ethiopia have been, using it for different machine learning projects. Feel free to check that resource out. And yeah, apart from that, as I said, if you're talented, we're always looking for talent. If you really like our mission, just come join us. You can reach us at hello@lesan.ai. And also for the people with the resources, if you may not have the talent or the time, but if you have the resources, we are a passionate team of people who want to make a difference. Come invest in us and join us in this journey. So that's my message there.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. You mentioned that you have been working on kind of collecting data set for the Horn of Africa. And we'll put a link to it in the description box again, so that people who might be interested in that could have access to it. But maybe tell us a bit about that. What is that? What's the purpose of it?
Great. So the purpose of this benchmark dataset mainly was, so think about, Lesan, one entity, and then there are these other giant tech companies that are trying to build, or that are building machine translation systems. And there are no publicly available data sets to kind of compare these systems, the quality of the systems. And let's say this young kid from rural Tigray, comes and wants to try out and check out, their skills on and build their own machine translation systems. So by creating these kind of public data sets, we are encouraging researchers and practitioners to build, machine translation systems and see where their system is. So in a way, we're literally like opening this up for other researchers and practitioners, so we can all have like a standard, to move this machine translation, but also other related kind of technologies going forward. It's a very common practice in established fields of engineering to have standard benchmarks of where a field exists. And so for machine translation, especially in our area, in the Horn, this is literally the beginning. And we expect to see this contributing for the years to come as researchers and practitioners start building systems in this area.
Well, I think that's excellent, and I'm sure that there would be many more people who would find it interesting, that the data set, and it's incredible that you kind of took the time and the effort to prepare that. I'm thinking it must have been very kind of painful and long process to develop that.
It is, and I must say the credit really must go to the people who did a lot in this, mainly our wonderful translators, and with the project management, Director Sos and Abel. It's absolutely a team effort, and for many of these languages, it's very, very difficult. And I must say, I have built systems in machine learning, and I have built data sets. I can tell you, building data sets is orders of magnitude harder than building fancy and state-of-the-art even machine learning algorithms. So yeah, it was a humbling experience, and yeah, thanks to our team of translators and so on. And I hope it can contribute to the development of these languages, really.
Surely, yeah. So if you can again kind of zoom out a bit, and so you told me that the whole thing started with you being impressed with the local language that the Japanese professor was using, and then that kind of set you on a journey, right? And then one thing led to another, and you here. But that doesn't mean that you didn't have the kind of the requisite skills in terms of, it could be programming, it could be mathematics, it could be whatever skills is required in this field. And there will be people who will be listening to us now who have maybe different skill set in terms of the kind of the exact skill set that they have. And surely kind of the path that you have followed is not the only path that leads to machine learning and to artificial intelligence. Surely there should be other paths as well. What do you say to people who might be eyeing a career in these fields? What is that they should be doing now?
Yeah, great question. I'm still in that journey, so it would probably be too early to give any sound tips from experience. But surely for machine learning, you don't need to have a PhD in machine learning to do meaningful to build meaningful products in machine learning. In fact, if you come from any other field other than computer science, you are at a unique advantage, because now with these educational materials that are available online, freely available in machine learning, what's hard to build is like this specific skill sets and unique insights in different areas across different disciplines. So yeah, if you're coming from a different discipline, try to check out like some resources on Coursera, edX. There's some amazing, introduction to machine learning courses. Andrew Ng, very famous in the field. I've taken his courses and I can't recommend them enough. Wonderful resources, freely available on the web. Yeah, and just make the jump. I sometimes say, life is too short. If you really love an area, if you want to contribute, if there's something you truly care about, it's probably time to just jump in and give it a try.
Well, you said life is too short, and that's true. Is that part of the kind of rationale why you jumped in this project and trying to do as much as possible?
It absolutely is, Tech. For me, this is just more than a fancy entrepreneurship exercise. I deeply care about this problem. If there's just one thing so far I'm absolutely proud of, and I hope to see millions of people in Tigray back on the web. And, this tiny little product we built makes a meaningful difference in the lives of the people I deeply care about. This is what it is about for me. It's deeply connected. I feel strongly about this. I mean, I can talk in terms of like concrete terms, as like growing up in Tigray, educational materials are literally absent in Tigrinya, but even relevant content really absent. And so if Lesan could somehow contribute a little bit in democratizing educational resources in these communities, I would be the happiest.
Yeah. Well, you said that educational material in Tigray is extremely limited, and absolutely, of course, I agree with that. Was there a moment when you started your master's degree in France when you said, I wish I had learned this?
So I think the typical journey I had in education is one of a privilege, I must say. I have to confess, even though I come from Tigray, I was one of the very few fortunate who went to, relatively a better school. So early on, I had access to good teachers, good resources in English, not in Tigrinya. Probably what was lacking was, experience with research. One of the things I always mention is, you just arrive in France and you have these professors whose names you see in papers, and it's, it's crazy, but they're so accessible. They have no ego. They're just like, you like to do this. Okay, I will give you this assignment and you can be part of this research. And that's how I just got into research, literally. So I wish there was more exposure to research, and that's because that's my inclination. But there are also other forms that people care about. Building products. Now I'm into entrepreneurship. I wasn't exposed to the kind of tools and techniques that entrepreneurs know up until very, very late after a PhD, literally. And I hope we can bring all this and make them available early on to the youth there. So they can tap their potential and do meaningful things for themselves and for their communities.
Yeah, we'll come back to the entrepreneurship. I think that's a very interesting point. But when you said when you kind of look at the impressive list of papers that professors have published, it could kind of sound a bit scary for someone who has never published any paper. And I think that could potentially put off some people from approaching and kind of trying to speak with professors. But like you said, they're very welcoming, approachable, and all you need is just to kind of write to them and to describe what you would like to do. And they don't look at your profile and say, oh, this person doesn't have any papers, so I'm not going to kind of admit him to my research lab or that. They are very humble, and they only look for kind of potential. So that shouldn't be a reason for anyone to kind of be put off from trying.
Absolutely. Great.
So, but to kind of wrap up some points with respect to Lesan, Asmelash, we'll come back to technology and all. Inevitably, we will talk about war. But if you could, you said that life is short and you're trying to achieve and all that. But in terms of Lesan, what are you trying to achieve with that, with Lesan?
So in simple terms, it's opening up the web's content in local languages. In the short term, I could give you some of the projects we're working on. One of them is translating content on Wikipedia from English to Tigrinya or to Amharic or Oromifa. And by so doing, the wish is really that people will engage more. If you provide knowledge in their language, it will be more accessible. They will be more interested and hopefully do more good things for themselves. And if they do that, it will be also for their communities. That's the very short-term goal at Lesan. Long-term, if we have the support, the resources, and so on, as I said, we hope to level it up into this thing that not only supports text-based kind of translation, but much more into immersive technologies such as audio and video. And by so doing, you have like this holistic web experience in your language. It might sound a bit dreamy, and especially at this time when things are very, very tough for us as a tiny small startup. But again, that's our vision. That's where we want to head.
Yeah. So tell me the journey from being a researcher, and you have many publications, and you're a serious researcher, to technology and entrepreneur, if that is a kind of fair description. Maybe you correct me, but there must have been a journey, training, and things that kind of happened that motivated you, inspired you. So tell us about that.
Sure. So in practical terms, for this to happen, there was this program. There is still this program called Entrepreneur First. It's the people might know YC, Y Combinator in the US. It's literally a similar thing in Europe. And what they do is they accept individuals with potential to kind of build businesses. They bring them together, and then they give them training for 3 months and let them just explore each other's potential, and then help them team up and build something. And when I started at Entrepreneur First, or EF for short, I had this idea on the back of my mind, but I didn't actually start with that. In fact, they had this idea where they tell you, you did a PhD in X, try to apply that, team up with somebody who knows the domain problem, and then solve that. And I took that advice literally. So for the first week or two, I was working on leveraging social media data, stuff like, Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds and so on, to kind of like attack mental health problems. I quickly discovered it wasn't an area of experience I felt passionate about. Instead, I knew there was this thing deep down that I deeply, deeply cared about. And one of the program managers, Zefi, in one of the conversations, he heard me talk about this, and he was, look, this is exactly what you have to do. And that's what I did. And I started to look around for co-founders, and I found my previous co-founder there. And Entrepreneur First gave us 100K to get started on this journey together. And that's how it happened. So in practical terms, we're talking about accelerator programs, these incubation centers. Maybe there are many across universities or outside, reach out to these kind of places on the decision of, should I do this? What should I do next? It was a bit of a soul search. Like, I really had to sit down and ask for myself, what do I want to do next? And this is where that philosophical kind of like statement comes in. I felt like, if I have to do something meaningful, I don't want to put off anymore. I don't want to, this is the time to do something meaningful. And that's how that turn happened.
Well, that's a brilliant decision. But what are the challenges in this new kind of adventure, I would say?
So from the high level, I would say, coming from a technical background, it's not the technical challenges that are more challenging to me. So in building a product, it's been really proving the product market fit, as they call it. And it's just basically, it boils down to, how do you make this kind of project sustainable? You would be surprised, Tech, to find that, even if you build state-of-the-art systems, top-notch, best in the world product, and you're hit with some out of control situations, it's very, very hard to raise funding. So raising funding has been one of the challenges we had. We still keep trying, but apart from that, it's been the war. The war in Tigray, in Ethiopia, has negatively affected us because you approach investors and you tell them, like, we're building this technology. This is going to be the future for Africa, and it's very hard to excite them when you tell them about your first market, and all they hear is like war and so on. That has been really challenging. Those are the ones, like, that come top of my head.
You mentioned war, that you gave me an excellent segue into my next topic, and we are already approaching kind of 1 hour mark, so we'll wrap up soon. But as a person who is deeply engaged in academia, who is a pacifist, who understands technology, and a lot of technology have been used and deployed in the war on Tigray, as I would like to say, what are the lessons that you have learned, and generally, kind of in big picture terms, what are your views?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think technology is neutral, but its application can make it, horrible, or this amazing thing. Let's think about drones. You might have heard of this story, this startup in Tanzania that's, using the drone technology to deliver blood to, remote communities. An amazing kind of use of, drone technology. And on the other extreme, you hear innocent civilians in Tigray, losing their lives in the thousands by, the same technology, drone technology. So my take on technology is that, at the hands of the wrong people, it causes a lot of devastation and a lot of horror. But if we can kind of like create education, empower people with more technology, hopefully there's more good that there will be, more good uses. But yeah, for all the technology creators, I think it's a very interesting time to think deeply, not only just building technology, but where will it be used? I must mention, machine translation, just like any other technology, could be used for good and for bad. And every time I monitor, the logs of translation, I try to see, where it's being used, because it could also be used, to disseminate fake information, for example. And I think for the builders, for us, the lesson is very, very important. It is, it's not enough to build, the next big, awesome technology. We have to be the protectors. Where is it being applied? Or where is it being, deployed? And if the negative consequences are outweigh, the advantages, then probably we should, question if it's worth it to build these things. Yeah.
Had there been a moment, maybe this is kind of going to come off as crazy, but had there been a moment when you kind of thought that kind of pacifists like you, people who are fundamentally against war and who understand technology and how to build one, could kind of come together and create the right incentives to build technology that would, at the very least, neutralize technology in the hand of the wrong people, as he put it, kind of to prevent devastation that could be caused by that. For instance, in terms of kind of concrete terms, I'm thinking in terms of anti-drone technology and Tigray and things like that.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating question, what you ask it. And I have been asking this, a lot, especially in the aftermath of like this destruction of like, my family, our friends, and the millions of innocent people in Tigray. Unfortunately, what I realized is, as a technologist, there's some, you can do something up to a point. And then, after there are some things that technologists cannot solve. And one of them is like things like war. I think politicians have to step up and, learn from history. The wrong decisions cause a lot of destruction. And these are just reckless decisions from politicians. And good decisions from politicians give us a relative peace. Relative peace means good for the world. So unfortunately, this is an area where I don't feel technologists are actually qualified to do something. The role of technologists is just to build technology. But if they are aware, maybe if I was, in the drone industry, I would think twice if I'm building, this technology, and who should it go to? And yeah, at some point it was really hopeless for me, and also just realizing how you could be helpless at, regardless of like the skill sets you have and so on. At some point, it just
yeah. So, Asmi, I know that you have your family in Tigray, like the rest of us, and you have been disconnected for the past 2 years now, like the rest of us, and you've been trying to, work on the thing that you just described to us. It must have been painful as it has been for everybody, but what are your kind of coping mechanism, if that's the right way to put it?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and it's directly relevant for, especially for us Tigrayans. I know we're all going through this pain, but I believe that, you know, at some point it will pass. And unfortunately, nobody is there for us. We have to be there for ourselves. You know, people who are abroad, who are contributing, you know, to the war and so on. It's commendable what everybody is doing, but it's also important to keep, you know, sane in the situation, because you don't want to lose yourself in the process of trying to help others. We need every Tigrayan. We need everyone strong, healthy, to rebuild the community, to rebuild our, you know, the infrastructure and people.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, my last message there, I'm not sure I have any concrete, you know, advice apart from saying, you know, try to stay sane and be hopeful that things will change.
All right. Yeah, but I think we have to leave it at that. But before I let you go, I was just wondering if I could ask you kind of some philosophical questions in terms of AI, so that you could just, you know, give us your thoughts and what is happening. What are the philosophical questions? What are the kind of research frontiers in the area? What are the problems that people are trying to solve? I know people mention terms like singularity and all those things, and I know that there's kind of a debate as to whether or not there will be a point beyond which machines will kind of surpass human beings. And those talking points, tell us what your thoughts are, and then that would be that.
Sure, it's a fascinating subfield in its own. I'll be honest with you, I spend little time, you know, dwelling on that, even though I know it's such an interesting philosophical question. I don't believe we're there yet, but I strongly believe the kind of like tools and technologies we're building with, you know, with the current advances in machine learning is already super useful. It can definitely help us achieve more in very specific and narrow fields. And that for itself, for me, is just fascinating enough, you know, even if we don't answer the AGI, you know, artificial general intelligence in our lifetimes, it's just still amazing to kind of like leverage the current advances and do something useful for all of us.
Yeah. All right. Well, as fascinating as that was, I think we have to finish it here. I have held you for more time than I had promised. Sorry about that. But
thank you so much, Dick. It was amazing. It was great talking to you.
Hopefully, you will be generous enough another time to come and talk to us about things that you will have done by then. But I'm sure this will inspire a lot of people, and I think it would give idea. My main kind of motivation for having this conversation was also to give, you know, platform to people who are doing different things, to the things that we have been forced to do with respect to the war advocacy. And as important as those things are, I think it's also important to talk about things that would be inevitably important for Tigray when we start the rebuilding process. And one of the things that would be enormously important is research and technology and the things that you mentioned. So it was in that spirit that I wanted to talk to you. And I think many people will find it useful. So on behalf of my listeners, I thank you a lot, Asmelash. I know that you're very busy, and you took the time to sit down with me and talk. So
the pleasure was mine. Thank you so much, Dick, for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.